studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Lieutenant General Mike Flynn is here. He retired as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency this fall. His career spans 3 decades and includes every level of command in military intelligence. He previously served as top intelligence advisor to General Stanley McChrystal in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is credited with revolutionizing how intelligence is done inside the military. In 2010, he wrote a seminal report called Fixing Intel, a blueprint for making intelligence relevant in the military. It examines the military's inability to understand fundamental questions driving extremists. That paper proves relevant today. I'm pleased to have Mike Flynn at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Yeah, well, Charlie, thanks so much for having me. I know we've been trying to do this for a while. We have
indeed, and I met you when you were, as I mentioned, in this top colleague of Stan McChrystal in Afghanistan.
He remains a great friend of mine today.
Man knows something about leadership.
Yeah, he big time, and he is an exceptional leader in all, across the board. I mean, he's doing some amazing things today for a lot of organizations, and I think that that's going to carry on for a while.
We want to talk about ISIS, and we had one more example today when there is on the internet video of the burning in a cage of the Jordanian pilot who lost his plane and had to parachute out and was captured by ISIS, and then was the subject of an attempted exchange, which our Jordanians were prepared to do with a woman who's on death row in Jordan. We don't know why that failed, that exchange, but we do know today was this video.
Yeah, I mean, they put him inside of a cage. They probably doused him in gasoline, and they had a fuse going up to the cage, and they lit the thing off, and then just sat there and videotaped that. So you can imagine the kind of mentality that we're dealing with here when we're talking about this Islamic extremism.
What kind of mentality are we dealing with?
Well, I mean, I think it's people that see a way of life that is so different than the way what we cherish around the world and sort of the contributing world today. It's the kind of existence that, and I've dealt with these guys over the last 10 years. I mean, their thinking and their thought pattern and the kind of ideology that they have is just something that we just don't understand.
Is it drawn from the Quran or not?
Yeah, it is. It is to a degree. It is drawn from the Quran. I mean, these are individuals who are deeply, various forms of the Sunni religion, whether they're Salafists or whatever, but they absolutely believe in it, and they interpret it in a way that supports their ideology.
Now, is this some modern interpretation, or has it always been there in terms of what they cite as their reason for drawing these life codes?
Yeah. I think that what we're dealing with, and this is really one of these things where my personal belief on this is our failure to understand the deeply held religious beliefs that these guys have and how they are interpreting it and how they are acting it out. That failure to understand this really very menacing ideology has really led us to really sort of a mismatch in how we are executing a strategy and how we are executing even some of our campaign plans on the military side. So that lack of understanding is causing us to be somewhat confused as to how to do this.
Why don't we understand it? I mean, that's why we have people like you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some that have really taken a hard look at this thing, and from my perspective, as I was going through the last 10 years, and I spent 5 years over in Iraq or Afghanistan, it suddenly occurred to me, you mentioned the Fixing Intel report, it suddenly occurred to me that we were basically going after individuals, the sort of the capture kill that you hear a lot about, instead of trying to understand why they were actually doing what they were doing. We sort of went to the where are they, and let's get them, versus understanding why are they there. And I think that we now, I do believe now we have individuals who are really trying to understand what it is that we're facing, and it's going to be something that's going to go on for a long time.
I want to get to your strategy, but just tell me what the appeal is and why Muslim leaders will say these are not they don't even want to call those members of ISIS Muslims, because they're saying, we're Muslims, and we don't believe any of this.
Yeah, they're definitely Muslims. Yeah, they're definitely Muslims.
They do believe this, and
that's right.
And so therefore they are kidnapping religion. That's the argument they make.
Yeah, and I think that's a mistake. I do. I mean, I really believe that, and I've been doing this for a long time as an intelligence officer. I've been asked, who is it that we're facing, so we can figure out how to do something about it. And it's this old adage about, you have to define the enemy that you're facing, otherwise you can't defeat it. Right. And so I think that...
So define it for us.
Yeah, so I think that what we're facing is a Islamic religious extremist organization, and ISIS is a part of this, but this is actually much broader than that.
Broader than Al-Qaeda?
Much broader, more dangerous than Al-Qaeda, far more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. And when you begin to look at the spread from, I'll just really take it from Pakistan, Afghanistan, all the way over to Mali and Boko Haram in Nigeria. A lot of these individuals actually grew up together in many cases, particularly the leaders, where they were in training camps, they were in prisons together. I mean, you look at an individual like al-Baghdadi, who is this, quote unquote, the caliph in the Islamic State right now.
He's the man who heads up the Islamic State.
Yeah, twice he was in U.S. detention systems, and then the second time he was turned over to the Iraqis, and they subsequently released him. So in these various places where these guys operate from, they come out and they get right back at it, and they have created even more leaders, more groups, and I think the expansion that we've seen, and frankly from our own U.S. State Department, where in, I think 2004 we were talking about 21 designated Islamic terrorist groups in that part of the world. Today we're at 41. And these are designated Islamic terrorist groups by our State Department.
And what do they have in common, and how are they different?
Yeah, I think what they have in common, and this gets at the meat of how we define them, and this is the core. So we used to say AQ core was the guys living in a couple of caves in Pakistan, and that, to me, that's always been my argument. You maybe call them AQ command and control, or they may be the AQ senior leadership.
AQ being Al-Qaeda.
But the core of this element, of this segment of the Islamic religion, is the ideology, and that's the core, and that's what you have to defeat. The military component, the military phenomenon, if you will, is actually not the real challenge that we have. It's more of a social, cultural, psychological phenomenon, and it has spread, in terms of what we're facing. It's doubled in size and scale and geographic reach. And many of these individuals, particularly at the leader level, have spent time with each other in different places in this part of the world. So we have to recognize that we're not dealing with something where, like the strategy that we had at the beginning of this thing, post 9/11, where, kill the top three or capture them and we'll all go home. That strategy failed, and that was a strategy, and we recognized that, I think, halfway through this
we captured a lot of them.
We captured, Charlie, a lot of leaders, and we killed a lot of these individuals. But what we were doing, and the way I kind of equate it, we were doing, especially the special operations community, and there was a sense that they could do it on their own. We were the best spear fishermen in the world. So we were actually, just like you have fish in a pond, we were spear fishing for the best looking fish, right? And that's what we were really, really good at, and we became exceptional at that, not only as an organization, but even how we do the entire apparatus. And what we really needed was we needed net fishermen. We needed to cast a much wider net with many more tools inside of that pond to catch the kind of fish. And it wasn't so much to catch them, to capture them. It was also to do other things sort of socially, informationally. I mean, you see this video that they put out that we talked about at the beginning. This is purposely done. This is another recruiting video, and it's also in the 22-minute audio tape, or the videotape. They talk about the relationship between Jordan and Israel to tell their ideology, the mix that they are a part of, that Jordan is actually against them. So it's a Muslim nation against them, you know, and their belief system, and they're partnered with Israel. And, you know, I mean, these guys are very slick when it comes to that. We need to be outthinking them. We need to use far more of our imagination to defeat these guys, and it's going to take a while. It's
what is it we should do?
Yeah. Yeah. So
first, you said you got to define the enemy.
That's right. So number one, you have to define the enemy.
Right.
Number two, we have to organize ourselves. And we have to really think about how we're currently organized. So, and when I say organize ourselves, we have to organize ourselves in two ways. We have to organize ourselves as a nation, and then we have to organize the international community. And we have to be the leader in that. We have to lead this effort, and I think that certainly the international community wants that. When I say about organizing ourselves nationally, if you were to lay down on a map, a flat map of the world, the State Department, the Department of Defense, the CIA, none of those organizations are actually aligned with each other. And you'd think, oh, geez, they all work together. And it's difficult. You know, the best part is the relationships that we have, and that's really what makes this thing work. But that alignment is not where it needs to be today, and that's something that could actually be changed. That could be adapted. The second thing, internationally, in the region, I mean, and I'll use NATO because the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, people understand, that's a political alliance to do military things. So we have to get the Arab nations, the contributing Arab nations that keep saying they don't like what's happening, and frankly, if they don't do something about it, it's going to come back to bite them you know where. We have to help them organize almost a NATO-like structure in the Arab world to defeat this threat, to defeat this ideology.
Tom Friedman wrote a column saying, yes, there is a hidden debate going on that needs to be focused more on within Islam, saying, you know, why do we tolerate this?
Yeah.
As you just said, it has to be an Arab NATO, meaning it has to be an Islamic NATO against people who are hijacking the religion.
That's right. And there has to be a really strong message when we throw out the word moderates. So where are the moderates? What are the moderates saying? And that's a great question. I mean, so where are the moderates? And are the moderates the leaders of these countries? And I would tell you that I don't hear them enough personally, and I have not seen them, you know, jumping up and down over the last few years saying strong comments. I mean, you know.
Why are we tolerating allowing somebody to kill a Jordanian who is a Muslim?
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's a difficult example because he was placed in that role because he was fighting for an international coalition, versus the indiscriminate killing that they do of other Muslims. But I would tell you though, when we try to compare what it is we're doing, Charlie, you know, to historical examples, I mean, you know, I was, you know, giving a talk the other day to a group of people, and we were talking about Nazism. I mean, the Nazis killed an awful lot of German citizens. So there's these trends that occur. Right now, we're in a trend where we have a group of very, very dangerous, very sophisticated and savvy individuals and leaders and large numbers. This is not some, you know, 1/10 of 1%. There are a lot of them. I mean, if you just think about the number of foreign fighters that have traveled from, I think the number is somewhere over 40 countries into Syria and Iraq to fight. I mean, that's...
And they leave Syria and Iraq with skills,
right,
with the capacity to
kill.
That's right.
That's right. And also,
as we saw in Paris.
That's right. That's right. I mean,
these are there.
I mean, in that case, it was an Al Qaeda, you know, in the Arabian Peninsula. But it's the same thing. It's the same idea. I watched a video the other day, Charlie, that a friend sent me of a young Canadian kid. I mean, just a young man, not more than maybe, you know, 30 years old. And he left Canada to go to Syria. And he basically was describing his life in Canada, playing hockey on the ponds and, you know, and growing up in the high school system. And he was turned by the individuals that basically he befriended, and they befriended him, and he started to develop this belief system, which is the belief system of Islam from the versions that we're dealing with now, this extremist version of it. And he was turned to the point where he then traveled to Syria and he fought for ISIS. So we have to look at what, you know, I mean, that video was sent to me because I'm looking at it and I'm saying, wow. I mean, I have 2 sons, and they're about the same age as that kid, and I'm thinking, what would ever possess a kid to turn and go and do something? This is a kid that actually grew up and had opportunities.
Yeah, see, that's the interesting point. Frequently, the assumption is that the young people who are attracted to ISIS come because you know, they have such a terrible life. They're unemployed. They don't have a job. They don't have a future. And all of a sudden, this group appeals to them, and you can go, come with us, and you'll have a community, you'll have a mission, you'll go to heaven, whatever those things, whatever that is. Right. And so, and you'll be somebody, and your life will have purpose.
Yeah, it'll have meaning. And
you're saying it's not just the poor and the dispossessed and those without jobs. It is the sons and daughters of whatever the middle class.
Let me give you an example of something that happened to us in Iraq. And so this is an example of the type of people that we're dealing with. We had a raid on an objective, so on a tactical target, and this is in the 2005 timeframe. So it's a bit dated in terms of, you know, the time frame, but it's exactly the kind of problem that we're dealing with. This raid, we knew there was going to be leaders in that, Al-Qaeda in Iraq leaders. So many of these guys that were in that raid are on the battlefield today. So there were 9 of them. And when we brought them all in, we were really just looking for 1 or 2 because we didn't really know who the other guys were. All the individuals' average age was somewhere between 45 and 50 years old. When we finally figured out who some of these guys were, these were individuals who were doctors, engineers, teachers, but all very devout Islamic extremist ideology believers. And they were having essentially a leadership meeting, and we were lucky enough that we had got pretty good intelligence, and
And from your interrogation of them, what did you discover? Yeah,
so what we discovered was that, you know, one of the things that came out of it was, I go back into, you know, you mentioned Stan, I go back into Stan, and essentially said, these guys Stan was head of JSOC as Special Forces at that time, you know, a task force that we had. And, you know, essentially it was, we're dealing with not just 20-year-old kids that are trying to get their, you know, quote unquote, their jihad on. We're actually dealing with some very sophisticated guys, and half of that objective weren't Iraqis. So they were mostly, half was foreign. And so that started to really wake us up to the fact of what we were starting to really have to deal with. And that's when we really started to hone in on what was the foreign fighter flow then. And at that time, we were probably looking at, you know, 50 to 100 foreign fighters coming in from primarily North Africa, some from East Africa. Now we're looking at, you know, and the estimates that I've seen is anywhere from 500 to 1,000 a month from roughly 40 countries, and we've already seen, you know, Europe talking about their problem. I just mentioned Canada. You know, I think the FBI director has come out and said we roughly equate about, maybe we have around 100 Americans that are right there. You know, we really don't know what the numbers are, but the numbers that you do hear, it's probably higher.
So you can't kill them all.
You can't, and that is part of the strategy that I think we have relied too much on.
We've gone after the leaders and thought if we can get them, we can stop it. You can't do that.
Can't do it.
So we can't simply, I mean, would boots on the ground in Iraq and Syria with enough firepower do it?
Yeah.
Or are you saying the capacity of the ideology to recruit new members is so strong that it'll take a much longer time?
Yeah. So the capacity is strong. Yes. Yes. So the supply problem is going to remain as long as they have recruiting videos like the one that they showed today. That's a recruiting video.
Why is that a recruiting video?
Because it shows them being, you know, the tit for tat, the eye for an eye was this, you know,
this guy dropped bombs on
this
us.
Young man dropped bombs, you know, on behalf of the direction, the orders that he was given, you know, like a lot of, you know, American soldiers have done. And he did it. And those bombs resulted in probably the burning of people. So beheading was not good enough for this guy. They were going to do what he essentially was probably doing to, you know, the people that he was trying to get, them. And so, so there is a capacity issue in this ideology that we have to understand. We're going to have to deal with. That's why it's a social or cultural phenomenon. It's really not a military one.
Yeah, but in terms of the battle that's taking place now, I mean, you have to? Is it essential that you retake land?
Yeah, Charlie,
that
would,
they
yeah.
have taken,
Yeah.
including cities like Mosul.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a first order of
yes.
business?
I mean, I think, a quick military answer is yes. But looking at this thing sort of geostrategically, we probably are not going to have the nation-state existence that we saw only a few years ago. I mean, number one, the number of displaced and people inside of Syria and Iraq right now, and the number of refugees is the most in the history of the world. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Refugees is between 2 and 3 million.
The destruction of the physical destruction of what exists now, because you're talking about 3 years of some very intense fighting, even more so than when we were there in many cases. And so the breakdown, and this is something that I do believe we are beginning to see, the breakdown of the nation state in certain areas of the world because of this is actually a real problem. And I think that in order to go back to the way things were, which I don't see that happen, and I don't see a defeat of this ISIS, and we have a nice clean boundary between Syria and Iraq anymore. I actually think that we're going to see potentially a breaking apart of this thing. Now, to answer your question
you think we'll see, right now ISIS controls land between Syria and Iraq. And you think what's going to happen?
I don't see
Remember, you're the former director of the
Defense
Intelligence Agency, and the right hand is Stan McChrystal in Iraq and intelligence right hand.
Yeah, and other jobs too. I mean, been at this a long time.
So tell me what you think is going to happen.
I don't see us returning to that picture on a map again in any.
Because we can't.
Because of the scale of the problem right now in that region, and unless there is, as I said earlier, unless there's an international alliance that's formed, and it's got to be formed pretty quickly, and our problem is we just don't lack internationally the agility to move that fast, to bring something like that together. I mean, how long have we been talking about, building a military force or some type of force to go back to fight these guys?
But isn't there growing, or I'm asking, is there a growing recognition by Saudi Arabia, by Jordan, by the Emirates, by,
Yeah.
Because one of the demands of ISIS was that Jordan get out of the coalition.
Right. That's right. So you're going to see, I think, there's already been attacks along the Saudi border.
Yeah.
So the problem is that you have a segment, this is not just in Iraq in the Al Anbar Desert or in the eastern desert of Syria. There are these segments, and they're large. These are large numbers in every one of these societies. And the nations that don't deal with the social, cultural, the educational, the economic problems, and this, the idea to give these individuals in their societies, primarily young men, something better to do, what's going to happen is it's going to eventually come back and bite them.
But I'm asking, do they recognize that, and are they?
Yeah, I think that some do.
My understanding is that the Saudis, in certain instances, were they recognized late in the game that Al Qaeda was a threat to them and that they were on the target list.
Right.
Even though Wahhabism and Salafism came out of Saudi Arabia.
I really do believe that we've got to be. One of the things that has happened is, and we're not there yet. We're not energy independent yet, but this has to do with, with what you're asking. The chain that has existed for 40 years around essentially our leg for reliance on fossil fuels, oil and gas in the Middle East, that chain is breaking apart, and in fact, we could say that we will eventually get to energy independence in this country. So that chain has always kept us there in that region, and we need to be in that region for certain reasons. But what has got to be directed, and this is where the leadership piece matters, they have to understand that they have to step up and do more, because we don't want to put 10 or 20 or 30,000 U.S. boots on the ground there. What we want is the Arab world who is having these problems do what they can do collectively together so they can either return to a sense of stability and security, but to achieve prosperity, Charlie, is going to take decades, if not a generation or two.
But I mean, part of the problem is not
for everybody. Prosperity for everybody.
I mean, what's the resistance? Why don't Saudi Arabia and the rest of them in the Middle East see this as an emergency?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, and it's even a problem right here. It's people kind of come and go, and don't see this. Hey, that's a problem over there, and the belief system that we're dealing with, as you just saw with the unbelievable attack against in Paris against the Charlie Hebdo attack. I mean, what you saw is basically what we will see more of is the kind of attacks that don't just cause some tactical event to occur. I mean, every time they do something like that, and they know this, and I know this because I've talked to them about it, these attacks that they do, these sort of less than the 9/11 spectacular attacks, what they do is they continue to raise fear in a society, and they cause us to have to change our way of life, our behavior, for everything that we do, every type of security measure that we're going through. I mean, anybody that's traveled through airports, all these things have changed because of terrorism. And they will see this, and they do see it, and they will continue to work towards achieving a means by which they're really attacking our economic system. I mean, the missive that bin Laden wrote in the late 90s was not to defeat the West through military means, it was to defeat them through economic means.
And drive them out of the Middle East.
And drive them out of the Middle East.
Yeah.
So...
Did we get a treasure trove of stuff when...
Yeah, we did, actually.
When they killed him?
Yeah, quite a bit of information.
A lot of stuff in terms of what he thought and what he was trying to do.
And one of the things from my perspective, what I wanted to know was what were they learning about us? But one of the things that struck me was the way that they were capturing lessons learned. They captured a lot of lessons learned from the way Zarqawi operated in Iraq, for example. Zarqawi was just absolutely bloodthirsty. Al-Baghdadi and the way that they're operating is different.
Was he a lieutenant?
Yeah, Al-Baghdadi was in the sort of the inner circle of Zarqawi. That's right. That's right. In fact, he was released from Camp Bucca, which was one of the detention facilities there in I think the 2005 timeframe, and he went right into the inner circle of Zarqawi and became one of his really effective lieutenants, actually. And so, now he's back out there, and there's others that were captured that are now back out.
Went to Syria and then came back.
Yeah, so I mean, I just think that we just have to recognize that we're dealing with something here that we really do have to come to grips with defining it. We just have to. And it doesn't mean that we're any less respectful of the Islamic religion. It just means that this segment of the Islamic religion, this extremist group, and it's not a small number, they are absolutely dedicated to destroying our way of life. And that's not just the U.S. way of life. So we have to convince people that these guys are serious and they mean business.
If the President of the United States was sitting at this table based on what you have heard him say and what you know, would he say, I understand everything you've said, Mike.
Sure.
Thank you very much. But then that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to meet that challenge.
Yeah, I think he would probably say that. But, I mean, the challenge is, because the assessments and all of the information that is getting to the leadership, I mean, why do we, for example, when we detain somebody, Gitmo, okay, Guantanamo Bay, where we have detainees, why do we give them a Koran, a prayer rug, and make sure that they have all the time in the world to practice their religion?
Because we have a value that says you respect freedom of religion.
So why don't we recognize the fact that these guys are, in fact, Islamic extremists? Many of them haven't changed there. Why did we bury bin Laden wrapped in a white sheet in a somewhat respectful way? And that's our value system. So
you object to both of these things.
I don't object to it. My point is that what I'm saying is that we already recognize that this is an Islamic problem.
By the fact that we show respect for them and give them a Quran.
So why not just call it?
We recognize that there's a connection between them.
We connect them.
Yeah.
And in fact, we have...
By the way, we bury them by what we provide
we
for them.
have various assessments that call them like they are. So and in fact, even in the Arab world, the Arab leaders they will call it like it is. So why is it that the United States has such a difficult problem? I mean...
Well, do you think the president has a difficult problem?
I do. I think he does. I think he's got a challenge with calling it like it is.
The White House doesn't like to call it the Islamic State, as you know.
Right. Right.
You know? I mean, they call it Daesh, as you know.
Right. I mean, I just think that, call it like it is. I mean, let's get off the dime and just call it like it is.
Which is, one more time.
Islamic extremism.
Right.
And and as they say it, they call themselves that.
Islamic extremists.
Yeah, they are Islamic, and they are
And they say
militants.
we're interpreting the Quran as we see it.
That's right. And it's interesting because there's not like 10,000 or 50,000. There's many, many more that are interpreting it like that.
I'm straining for this, but I want to make sure I understand you, because the responsibilities you have had and the access you've had and the performance you've had. If you look at the rise of Nazism, do you see some parallels?
Yeah.
That is something that is growing, and all of a sudden we're going to wake up, and it's much more powerful.
Yeah, I do to a degree. I mean, so Nazism went on for, the better part of 15 years. Really, you go back to, to a degree, the late, 29, 30, right, post-World War I. So, really, rise was, I think, at 33, and then, of course, when we defeated them.
We're not saying the two are the same, but we're saying
it's an ideology.
Right.
It's a deeply held ideology. If the United States of America didn't get themselves involved in World War II and do what we did for Europe, frankly, when we did it, today, had the Nazis won, had Hitler won, there'd be people praying at the altar of Nazism today. And whatever that would have become, because that was such a vile, as I mentioned, the Nazis, like we say, the Muslims are killing mostly Muslims. Okay, I got it. That's very true. The Nazis killed an awful lot of German citizens. So, and the direction that they were going to take,
especially those that opposed them.
Yeah. So when if you look at three sort of big cycles, and I'll be very quick. Nazism, we basically crushed them through military means, and there was some other minor things that we did. I mean, I don't want to be too generalizing on the minor side, but we crushed them through military means. When you look at the political ideology of communism that took us 4 years, we actually defeated that through both a combination of thinking and other actions that wherever the communism raised its ugly head, we were going to strike at it. And we used military, we used intelligence, we used different things, but it was a combination of strength and imagination. Today, we're trying to defeat this ideology, this religious ideology, with military means. That's my sense, and I think people think, we're striking this.
Boots on the ground in Iraq and Syria.
Now,
wherever they come from,
there's other things happening, but this ideology, the only way to defeat it is by really, really stretching our imagination and starting to think about how is it. First, why is it? So when you talk about like grand strategy, when somebody says, well, what's our strategy? We don't have any strategy. Policy tells you this is what you're going to do. Strategy tells you this is how you're going to do it. There's something called grand strategy that says this is why we're going to do it. So, for example, in 1947, we had the National Security Act, which was essentially, it was a classified document until like the mid-90s. It was essentially why we needed to defeat communism. And that act, despite the administrations over time, each one kind of operated on their own ideology, our own political ideology, but each one accepted that that was our mission. So what we're going to have to do with all the other challenges that we're facing, China, Russia, transnational organized crime, what we're going to do about Iran, the rise of other extremist groups that are out there. But we need to have some type of very imaginative, grand strategy that says, here is why we need to defeat this idea, and then decide how.
So you got first to understand why. What is our call to action?
That's right.
Why do we have to defeat it? And then you have to say how we're going to do it. Now, here's what's interesting about you, to know about you and to hear you. I mean, you believe that we have to be much more sophisticated about understanding the root causes of how this has come to be the problem it is, and understand what motivates them, understand how they think about the world, and understand all of that. And it has to do with religion, it has to do with culture, it has to do with understanding
psychology,
all of that, you know, which is sort of what some would consider a sophisticated look at intelligence. It's not just
and it's not just the intelligence system is a strategic advantage for us if we use it properly, and I think for the most part we do. But that's exactly the issue. To get at that, and people are going to go, oh, we know these guys, why don't we know this?
But at the same time, you're saying that's where you have to go, but don't for a second think that this is a solvable problem by simply military action on the ground in the Middle East.
In fact,
because it won't be effective, or because under the circumstances today, it's hard to get the national will to do that.
That's right.
Not only here because of Iraq and Afghanistan, but also in other places in Europe, Western Europe.
Yeah. So something else too that you're getting at, and this is really the time, the sort of the strategic timeline that we are facing, because time is not on our side strategically. The closer you get to having to do boots on the ground. So we've been observing this activity for like 3.5, almost 4 years now, going on in Syria, and now it's coming to Iraq over the last 1.5 years. So, and we have this drumbeat that says we've got to, do more in there. And I agree, we probably have to do more in there, but what we do is different.
Well, you also, go ahead. But you believe, I understand, that we missed the opportunity to do more in Syria.
We did.
At the moment that there was.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. And I
which
think
is
that
to support people who were not opposed to Assad, but not ISIS and lots of other.
The closer, Charlie, that you move toward conflict, so the closer where we sit in a sort of a peaceful environment, the closer you move towards conflict, the more risks you're taking, the more it's going to cost you, and you have less and less options. And if there's one thing that I learned as a young officer a long time ago, is the best plan to have is the one that gives you the most options at the last possible minute. And I feel like we're moving towards that. And
more options?
More options. We need more, the strategy part, the how do we do it, we really need to look at a series of options. And I'm not talking about, military and economic. I'm talking about a combination of things that are both from a U.S. perspective, because we still have to protect our self-interest, as well as from an international perspective.
Here is another question. You've said that first you got to clearly define the enemy. We talked about that. You have to articulate a clear, unambiguous strategy and ensure everyone understands. So then you say we must create a single, unified, and international change of command, like Eisenhower in World War II.
Exactly.
What makes you think that who's going to be in that chain of command? Is this going to be led by the United States? Because a lot of other people who come to this table and they say, what we need is a NATO in the Arab world. That's what you need.
Yeah,
this is not a battle that the United States should be leading. You don't have to be led by someone else.
Yeah.
You don't.
We should not be ashamed of being the world leader. We should not back down from being the world leader. And we should not be ashamed of protecting our values and protecting our interests around the world. Now, having said that, when I thought about that particular statement about creating a single chain of command unified under both a national and international sort of umbrella, I mean, that is something that, and again, I used Eisenhower as an example, in World War II, because
he was the supreme Allied commander.
He was the supreme.
I mean,
he was basically told, win the war in Europe, and
he was told beat Nazis. Right,
and so do and use whatever resources you need, and different times, but conceptually that is still very doable. I mean, the question to ask is who is in charge. I mean, today.
Well, I'm asking you, who should be in charge?
Well, I mean,
you're saying U.S. should be in charge because it's in their national interest.
Yeah.
But does Iran want us to be in charge? Does Russia want us to be in charge? Does Saudi Arabia want us to be in charge? Does Britain want us to be in charge? Does France want us to be in charge?
Yeah. I think that what we have to do is look for what's common amongst all those nations. and I would segment out Iran, because Iran is actually part of the problem. Iran is a deep part of the problem.
Yeah, but
so these others
they're as much of an enemy of ISIS
yeah.
as Jordan is.
Sure, but Iran
on
through,
this point, they're as much of an enemy of ISIS.
Yeah, but I mean, Iran is a state sponsor of terrorists.
ISIS is Sunni.
Iran has killed more Americans than Al Qaeda has, through state sponsors, through their terrorist network called Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. So we have to recognize that this is a very dangerous, I think, is a very dangerous country that we have to.
Hezbollah has killed more Americans than Al Qaeda did. Al Qaeda, let's assume, killed
the Iranian
on
that's right.
9/11. How many Al Qaeda killed?
Been, I mean, when you're talking about
Hezbollah killed them
the
where?
Marine Beirut
how many was that? 200?
It was 283, and
right.
then you're talking about another in the embassies in Africa. You're talking about individuals in Europe in a couple of cases. You're talking about a large number in Iraq that we knew were being killed by these different types of projectiles that they brought in from Iran. So, I mean, that's a different issue than what we're talking about.
Quds forces and
Quds forces and the Badr Corps and Sadr and all those that
were Iraqis.
They were Iraqis, but the Iranians were operating inside of
with the support of Iraq.
With the support of Iran. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's right. So this chain of command thing is really an interesting one, because, you know, if you were to ask today who's in charge, and it can't be the President of the United States. It's got, you know, is it Lloyd Austin down at Central Command? Yeah. Probably not. I mean, it's not. That's the military component.
Now, the military plans to try to retake Mosul, for example.
So who do you put in there? And is it a team of people? You know, is it one or two or three? And if it is, somebody still has to have the final vote.
Here's the last point you make in terms of this. Now, a couple more questions. We must tell the American public that this is likely to last for decades.
Yeah.
The American public gets tired of war really quickly.
Yeah, and so if we stop, let's just say we're going to all go home, we're not going to commit another, you know, soldier overseas to this effort, that would be it would not be a good thing. It would be a very dangerous move to make. We have to stay engaged against this enemy. This enemy is what we've seen in the last month with the beheadings, this latest thing with burning this kid alive. I mean, these are individuals who are very serious. They're very sophisticated, and for a period of time, Charlie, in 2006-07 time frame and 2008-09 time frame, they were actually beating the most sophisticated military, you know, in the history of the world that was put together, and that was in Iraq in the 2006-07 time frame. We weren't winning.
This was in the midst of the before you guys.
Well, I mean, we were
before. That was before the surge.
That was before the surge.
And that was before.
That's right. So we cannot.
That was at the height of the sectarian.
If there's anything I learned as an intelligence officer, is never take your enemy for granted. And I don't take these guys for granted, not one bit. Yeah. And so we can't take them for granted because of how they look. You know, I mean, what they're dressed in, you know, the way that they move on the battlefield, because they're not moving as sophisticated formations, the kind of weapons that they have. We tend to look at these individuals in groups and just kind of go, well, these guys aren't.
Okay,
you look at their information campaign.
You were director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Would you define today the biggest threat to America's national security, the issue we've been talking about at this table this evening?
Yeah, great question. So this is the issue about what's existential to our country. What would take our ability away from us that we cherish? I personally, the way I would answer that, Charlie, is that one of the things I think is an existential threat to this country is the loss of who we are, the idea about American values and what we cherish, why we are the way we are, why we're such a good, strong country. We have got to protect that. That's an existential threat that's not going to hit us today, but over time, if it erodes, we've got to be very careful of that and protect that. In terms of, is there a one enemy out there? I mean, we loved, you know, in a way, I mean, you know, and I've had these conversations, we enjoyed, I guess, having the Soviet Union because it was one problem that we could worry about. Today, we don't have that. We have 10 problems that we're worrying about. Is one or the other existential? I think the economic system is an existential problem. and I think we have to pay very close attention to that. I don't see a military threat. I mean, there's always the one-off North Korea, with their capabilities with nuclear weapons. But
did you leave government because you didn't think you were what? You're a candid guy.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you that for me it was, you hire Mike Flynn, you're going to, if you ask anybody from the time I was a lieutenant, are you hiring me to just sit there, and watch my thumbs twiddle? No. You're going to hire an individual who's going to come in and shake things up and look to make things better. All of us get an institution, a part of the institution, in good stead. And as I used really my entire career, but frankly, as I looked at what we were facing and what we faced over the last decade, I was trying not to move an organization to fight the last war. That would be irresponsible. I was trying to look at the trends that we are facing in the future. And we're facing massive urbanization. We're facing massive amounts of population growth in the part of the world where there's not a lot of good governance. I mean, 65% of the world's population, the largest chunk, is going to be in the Sahara and Sub-Sahara area in the next probably 15 to 20 years. And I mean, you're talking about a country like Nigeria, Charlie, that has approximately 200 million people. In the next 15 or 20 years, that country is going to surpass the United States in population, and it's going to be the third most populated country on the planet.
In how many years?
In probably about 15 to 20 years.
Because their population rate of growth is that big?
Because you have childbearing women in that society, and it's tragic in some cases because of the way these guys go out and seize these young women. But you have a population growth of about 6 to 10 per childbearing women in parts of the world, in the north and central part of Africa, in the Middle East, and frankly, one of the challenges that Russia has is on its periphery. It's the same sort of issue. So if you have these nations, we call nations, if they don't have structures, government structures, or it's incredibly corrupt, or it just lacks any form of real governance, you can't have security. And people are going to look elsewhere to do things, particularly young men who have nothing better to do. And you bring in these transnational organized criminal cartels that are huge. I mean, we're talking multi-billion-dollar organizations in Latin America, South America, and clearly in Africa.
What is the important difference between, and is it just tactics, between Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, Boko Haram, Nigeria, Daesh, ISIL, ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, Al-Qaeda, represented by Zawahiri and Osama bin Laden? What's the difference today between them other than tactics?
Right. Well, so briefly, what's not different is the ideology.
I didn't mention, Khorasan I didn't mention.
So what's not different is the ideology. The ideology is about the same.
That's the same.
It's clear. The difference today, or the difference from sort of where we were to today, is I would describe it like this. The lines between those organizations are thicker, meaning they have thickened their network of like-minded groups and leaders, and they are far better networked than they were 10 years ago. And I remember sitting, drawing out these guys I can remember sitting 10 years ago, Charlie, drawing these maps out and going, okay, what's the connection between this group in Afghanistan and this group in East Africa? Well, we've had some communications, there's some money, and it was a sort of a soft dotted line. That dotted line is now a big, thick black line, and there's a lot more connections. You look at the shifting of Al-Qaeda command and control or senior leaders out of Pakistan to the Arabian Peninsula. That occurred a few years ago. And you have these other elements that are out there. Boko Haram is is incredibly brutal.
This is the group.
This is the group in Nigeria.
Kidnaps children.
Yeah, kidnaps children. They had an attack yesterday on a village, and
wiped out.
It's like, well, their estimates are anywhere from 150 to 2,000 people killed.
Right.
I mean, this is just in the last probably 48 hours. So that the lines between these organizations and the way that they work together has thickened, and I think that we need to recognize that, because it's not just starting with Iraq and trying to do Iraq first and then we're going to deal with Syria. It's understanding this wider problem that we have and trying to solve it in a way that actually does something and suppresses it. We're never going to quite get rid of it. You're never going to get rid of the sort of the zealots that are out there. I mean, they've existed since the beginning of time. But you can suppress it, and you can get governments, to basically meter their own problems that they have and do more about it. But if governments are corrupt, it's not going to help. It's not going to help.
I leave you with two ideas. Number one is this idea: the United States cannot be the world's policeman. That's one idea.
Right.
The other idea is, if not the United States, who?
Yeah. So on both, it's okay to be the world leader. It's okay that we're the world leader. We should not, as I said earlier.
I didn't say leader, I said policeman,
but see, the policeman means that that means we are going to have to be the force out there leading whatever the problem set that we're trying to solve is. So, because it's about global leadership on a stage that still exists, and the United States is still the global leader, and so we should not be reticent to be the leader. Now, how you lead, you can also be the best follower by being the best leader sometimes. And how you do it, again, back to strategy and how we actually execute what it is that we're going to have to do in order to accomplish this problem, that sort of remains to be seen. And I think that we need to really take a look at one, why we should lead. There's all sorts of reasons why we should lead, and most of them are because the international community wants us to. Getting al-Baghdadi, the leader of Daesh or the Islamic State or ISIS, is not going to solve the problem. The military solution. Make a lot of people feel good. That's right. That's right. For 24 hours, and then we'll be right back at it. I mean, I stood over many of these guys, or was part of putting in detention centers, prisons, or killing many of these individuals, and we always felt like this is just going to go on forever. And we're sort of at a place now where I think everybody's sort of like going, Jesus, can't we do something more about this? Because this is not an academic, theoretical argument, Charlie. What they just did to that Jordanian pilot, who basically just gave his life for his country, for a Muslim country, is grotesque. And it should not, the contributing international community should not allow that kind of thing to happen. So we have got to figure out, and we've talked about a bunch of things to try to do, but I do believe the first thing to do is really clearly define who it is that we're facing.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it was great, Charlie, and thanks a lot for having me on.
Mike Flynn for the Hour. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. For more about this program and early episodes, visit us online at pbs.org and charlierose.com.